Good afternoon, everyone. I'm sorry that we are a few minutes delayed today. Welcome, and thank you for joining us. My name is Claire Prosser, and for those joining us for the first time, this is a bi-weekly webinar series where we explore all things SharePoint. Our next 30 on Thursday will be on May 29th, and the topic will be Keeping SharePoint Always On, and will be presented by our own SharePoint MVP, Liam Cleary. As always, our full schedule can be found on our website, sharepoint.protiviti.com/webinars. As well as our 30 on Thursday series, we do have a full schedule of more in-depth 3-hour webinars and online training sessions. So please take a look at our website and see the upcoming schedule. Our SharePointConference.org is just a few days away. It's next Monday, and there's just 1 or 2 registrations left. There is a coupon code there, 30T15, if you want to join us in Reston on Monday. Okay, so back to today's session. We are recording the session, and you can take a look at all of our previous webinars on the website. If you have any questions as we go along, you can enter them in the question box. You'll find that panel there on the right-hand side of your screen. So today's topic is the 5 things you need to know about migrating to SharePoint 2013. And actually, we have a switch up in our presenters. Tamir from Metalogix is joining us. My name is
Hi, everybody.
Yeah. Thank you, Tamir. So thank you for joining us, and I will hand over to you.
Okay, great. So, Claire, do I have control of it, or should I?
Should
I just share my screen?
Right now?
Oh, there we go. Great. All right. Let me share my screen and then get this going from where we started. Okay. Okay. Can you see my screen at this point?
Yes, I can.
Okay, excellent. Thanks a lot. So good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for having us on this session. My name is Tamir Orbach, not Steve Marsh, but I'm also with Metalogix. I'm a Director of Product Management for our migration product. And we'll be talking about the 5 things you need to know about migrating to SharePoint 2013. Given that this session is a fairly short session, we won't be doing any kind of demoware or anything like that. We're more talking about conceptually what's important to think about as you take on any of these types of migrations. So let's get started. When we look at 2013, there are 5 key areas that are really important, and we found this over and over again when we talk to our clients. And for those of you who don't know, we've got a lot of products that the product we're best known for is Content Matrix, which is a migration product. So we have over 4,000 active customers right now that are migrating using Content Matrix. So we hear a lot from them, and we talk to a lot of them about what they're doing. And so a lot of this is not only what our guidance is to them, but it's an evolution of what we keep hearing back from them as well. So the 5 things that we'll be going into are, 1, evaluate your strategy. And this could be collaboration and content strategy. It could also be your organizational strategy. A lot of people make the mistake of upgrading to a new version of SharePoint, but not really taking the time to look at any strategic changes or reorganizations within the company and representing those during the upgrade. So that's one of the most important aspects of this. Second is creating the content inventory, understanding what you've got now. Do you have old content that's no longer useful? Do you have content that should be highlighted even more than it is today? Things like that. Third on the list is creating a SharePoint inventory. So that means really looking at things like very large lists that, because they're very large, you're likely to have some performance issues for end users. So people might be complaining that the list is slow, or maybe you've exceeded a list view threshold where you've got multiple audiences that the list is targeted at, and each one has their own view. But while SharePoint lists can go up to hundreds of thousands of items, that's not the case if you've got views and you've got a lot of metadata on those lists. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well, creating an inventory and making sure that you know what that is before you start migrating. The other thing is to plan to leverage new functionality. There's a lot that's new in any new version of SharePoint. In this case, we're talking about 2013. There's particularly a lot that's new on the social front. So it may make sense to leverage some of that as you upgrade. And there are also some things that have been deprecated, and you may want to think about that and make sure that you don't just upgrade those as they are. Not that many. I mean, the biggest one there is really the meeting workspace, which is simply no longer available, but still important to be aware of. And the other thing is really developing an information architecture. And the key point there is very, very simple. It's that usability in SharePoint and adoption of SharePoint are very closely correlated to each other. And the number one factor related to usability or lack thereof is search. If people cannot find the content, they will not use SharePoint. So the fewer people can find it, the fewer people will use it. And people have a very low patience or threshold for finding information. In fact, a survey that was done by probably about 2 years ago on European and US-based users found that the average US user would spend no more than 3 minutes trying to find something on their intranet before they'd give up. And in Europe, a little bit more patient, 4 minutes. So, you know, if people cannot find things in that amount of time, and on an intranet, honestly, unless you have things set up properly, that would be, it wouldn't be far-fetched for something to take a lot longer than 3 minutes. They simply won't use SharePoint. If you have a proper information architecture, and if you have people tagging things, leveraging managed navigation, leveraging managed metadata, you can significantly improve search. So it's important to think about that before you start migrating to 2013, and we'll talk more about that. So starting with strategy, this is the biggest one, and you know, it's not just collaboration and content, it's about that. Has collaboration changed? Has your content strategy changed? But it's also about organization. Has anything changed in your organization? Do you have a new VP of marketing who's decided that, you know, you're going to be more lead gen based rather than cold calling or things like that? Or let me give you a more practical example of something in our own organization, 2 changes in our own organization. In the last 2 years, the product management group, which is a group that I report to as a product manager, it used to report to engineering. And the group that Steve Marsh reported to as a product marketing manager reported to marketing. So in our intranet, it was reflected that way. I would go to engineering as a site collection, and underneath that there would be product management, and that's where I would find our roadmaps and so on. But the reality is that with some changes at the top, we determined that really it made a lot more sense for the product managers to work very closely with product marketing and collaborate on a lot of the content. And so we shifted product management out from under engineering, and you know, we put it in a separate site collection under marketing, and the site collection is called product management and marketing and product marketing, so PMM. Okay, and I don't think we're unusual. That kind of change can happen. You might have finance working under operations. Finance grows large enough. Now you decide, you know what, finance should have its own site collection. So to make that change as you migrate, otherwise you're really not representing what the organizational changes that have happened. Many things that cause these things are things like acquisitions, leadership changes, and things like that. In the case of Metalogix, certainly acquisition plays in. We've acquired the assets of 3 companies since I joined a year and a half ago. So obviously a lot has changed, and we've had to reorganize a lot based on that before we started the migration to 2013. Departmental reorganizations also factor into that. An interesting little statistic here from AIM in a 2012 survey, and they found similar results in 2013. In terms of adoption of SharePoint, lack of strategic plans on what to use SharePoint for was given as the second biggest issue with adoption of SharePoint, following only lack of expertise to maximize its usefulness, so 46%. that's just kind of proving the point. The other thing in terms of changes, and not just organizational changes, this is an interesting little statistic. AIM is a group that's focused primarily on, companies that use enterprise content management systems. So perhaps this is a little bit skewed, but when the respondents bought SharePoint, only 19% were planning to use it for document management. But within a year or two, 78% were now using it that way. So if that's true, and if let's just say when you purchased it, you weren't planning to use it for document management, but now they are, you want to make changes to account for that. Maybe instead of team sites, you want to have document centers. Maybe you want to implement a little bit better version control. More importantly, maybe you want to, as you do the migration, enable co-editing of documents. Kind of one of the, in my mind, one of the most incredibly useful features of SharePoint 2010 and on that is underused. The fact that you don't need, you can set version control on and say, okay, don't force a check-in and check-out, and immediately 2 or more people can start editing the document at the same time. They can see where each one is, and each time they save, it creates another version, and the other person saves, and they get the refresh. That's document management, right? But as you migrate, put that in place, right? Because it makes it that much more powerful. Create content inventory. This is incredibly important. If you looked at our intranet from 2000 and SharePoint 2007, and of course we built on it and we used it until about middle of last year. We didn't migrate to 2010, so we didn't really eat our own dog food until we decided to migrate to 2013. There was so much content in there that hadn't been used. You need to search for what is the least used content. I recall looking at this and finding a 2011 most popular lunch and learn. But the question I would ask is, in 2014, who cares? Why would anyone care about the most popular lunch and learns of 2011? Are they still relevant? In today's world where everything is changing, is any of that really relevant? No. You've got a lot of content that's relevant, but a lot of it is completely irrelevant. And if you do upgrade and just move it along, what you're doing goes back to search. You're clouding search results with a whole bunch of irrelevant content that just shouldn't be there, and makes it even more difficult for people to find content that is important. So when you look for that content inventory, look at it, make sure that you capture the business purpose, and you assess the relevance of it. Is it still relevant? Is it still serving the business purpose that it had? Assess your current users. Make sure that they still have, there's some people that may have been given rights and permissions that they no longer need. Look at the location. An example we had was that right on our homepage we had a link to frequently asked questions about the web version of Migration Manager. So Content Matrix, one of our products at the time, one of 3 products at the time. And it was a single edition of Content Matrix out of 6. And there was a frequently asked questions list for that. Well, today we've got 9 products. So imagine having frequently asked questions on our homepage for 1 edition out of 6 of 1 out of 9 products. Would that make sense? No, it wouldn't make any sense at all. It's completely irrelevant at this point, and it's in the wrong location. It's not that those frequently asked questions are not important. They just shouldn't be on the homepage. So that's what we're talking about there, and it's important to look at that. The other thing is to create a SharePoint inventory. Something that a lot of people don't realize is that what you do with SharePoint and the size of different things, content databases, site collections, for example, has a huge impact on performance, ability to upgrade, and in general on functionality. A good example I mentioned earlier on was list view threshold. So I worked with a customer who was in medical health services, and I was in consulting at the time, and I met their CFO, and he said, SharePoint sucks. That was blanket statement, SharePoint sucks. So, it's hard to start a conversation like that, but I dug in. And what I discovered was, well, his primary use case as a CFO was they didn't have a real CRM system. They didn't have thousands and thousands of customers. They had a few hundred large customers. and they were using a list to store all their contracts. Well, they had about maybe 4,000 contracts, and at the same time, they were storing everything there. They were storing the contract date, the expiration, the contact person for the account, for the client, the contact person's email, address, phone number, secondary contact, all sorts of things, right? Now, to him, he didn't care about all that. What he wanted to know was, what is the contract, what's the value of the contract, and when is it going to expire? So he had his own view. Sales, on the other hand, had their own view that was only showing what's important to them, and support had their own view, which was only showing them what's important to them. Overall, the list had over 54 metadata fields, over 54 columns. So although it wasn't a large list, the performance, and the reason he said SharePoint sucks, was basically because they had surpassed a published, well-known SharePoint list view threshold. That's part of SharePoint inventory. It's part of knowing what you've got. That's a large list with list views, but there are other thresholds. Site collections shouldn't be larger than 200 gig. When they get larger than 200 gig, not only do they become more difficult to upgrade, they also become a little bit more unwieldy, and the performance starts to decrease. There are a lot of other thresholds, and there's a great list. There's a link here, and if we share the presentation with you guys, but it goes to TechNet, and it shows you all the SharePoint 2013 thresholds and limits, and I'd highly encourage you to look at that, and we will make sure that you have access to that. But that gives you an example of what to look at, and correct for those as you do the upgrade. Trying to leverage new functionality, that's mostly about improving search and improving usability. The biggest issue that people have with SharePoint is lack of adoption. I've mentioned that earlier on, right? And the biggest reason for that is search. But the second biggest reason is because a lot of times people just are not incented to go to their homepage. And some of the most interesting, successful intranets I've seen, and if you go back and look at intranet awards for the last few years, there's some groups that do awards for best intranet. Almost all of them put social right up front. And it's interesting how people work. It doesn't work for every company, but from a cultural perspective, when you put social up front in many companies, people want to go and look at what others are talking about. And then they see the rest of the news and announcements that the company has. But if you don't put social up front, a lot of the times they won't go to the homepage ever, except to get to the search engine. So that's one thing. Use social. You've got community sites in 2013. May as well use them. Migrate to them. Then there's also going back to search, managed navigation, managed metadata. Managed metadata services introduced in SharePoint 2010 makes search and the ability to create search pages with refiners, like a shopping experience on Best Buy or Amazon, where if you're buying a TV, you can refine by screen size, by brand, and so on. That capability is absolutely imperative to have working, and working well in an intranet, because you've got so many documents written by different people who aren't in marketing, who weren't writing them to be found. So if you have metadata about them, and you used managed metadata, then you've got consistent metadata about them. People can refine based on that metadata. It could be fiscal year, it could be customer, it could be product, it could be a whole range of things. But SharePoint 2010 and 2013 have implemented a managed metadata service. Make use of it as you do the upgrade. Convert local list or site columns that use choices to ones that use managed metadata as you upgrade. And then you'll find that these refiners in the search page are a lot more effective, and the whole search experience is therefore a lot more effective. Search in 2013 in general is so much better than it was in the past that you should get a bump up immediately. But really where you get the biggest bang for the buck is where you start adding refiners, and when those refiners are based on managed metadata. So look at that as well. And in line with that, develop a good information architecture. You might already have one, and it might be relevant for what you have today, or what you had at the time when you implemented it. But this is really an ongoing process, constantly looking at it. Over half of the people in the AIM study that was surveyed said that they'd be more productive with enhanced workflow, search, and information reporting. That's not the only one. There are a lot of others. We just recently did a survey at SharePoint conference, and we had a write-in field for people for options that weren't showing up. And when we asked, what would you improve most? 52% of the people we surveyed wrote in search. That's consistent with everything I've learned in my life. When I was at Microsoft, one of my jobs was a search compete lead for 2 years. It's absolutely critical to have search work, and in order for that to happen, you've got to have a good information architecture, meaning you have to understand what type of content you have. Is it applicable to your business processes? What type of site structure do you have? Do you have metadata that's appropriate? Do you have the appropriate departments in place? Do you want to reorganize any of them as you upgrade? So a lot of these things that we're talking about here are what I would say soft things. They're not, I'm not telling you, go out and run this tool before you migrate. There are tools that can help you with this, but what I'm telling you is do these things, sit down and spend the time before you upgrade, because if you don't, your upgrade is going to be considered a failure. And the primary reason is that all you've done is you've put new lipstick, on an old pig, because you've got an intranet that wasn't really that well adopted, and you've just made it look a bit better and easier to use. But is that enough? Our experience is it isn't. So if you look at that, and if you keep that in mind, that's really where our motivation is to say, look, you could go and do the out-of-the-box upgrade, and Microsoft has improved that a lot with SharePoint 10 to 2013, or you could use third-party tools. Why would you want to use third-party tools? Well, the out-of-the-box approach is basically one that with 2010 to 2013, there is no 2007 to 2013. You'd have to go to 2007 to 2010, and then 2010 to 2013. So that would be a huge amount of work. So for that, we'd recommend migration tools anyway. But if you're doing 2010 to 2013, not online, but regular 2013 on premises, you'd stand up the 2013 farm, and you would upgrade all your content databases, and you would leave them in a 2010 mode, okay, which is nice that they've got the full, not just the look and feel of 2010. They used to have that in the old 2007, 2010 upgrade. You could leave it in 2007 look and feel, but it wasn't really 2007, and it didn't really act like 2007. Now what they've done is really cool. It remains in 2010 mode, and they've got all the 2010 bits on SharePoint 2013 so that it acts exactly the same way. And then you upgrade your service application databases, and the site collections that you've got can then be evaluated by their owners. And when they feel ready to upgrade them, they upgrade them to the new experience. And that's a fantastic experience. It's a hell of a lot better than what it was in the past. But where it falls apart, and actually I'll leave this, where it falls apart is really where you look at those 5 things. When you do that content DB upgrade and that process, essentially what you're doing, because site collections are attached typically to a content database, well, they always are, but it's at the site collection level, is you're upgrading everything you have. You're not filtering any old content. The old frequently asked questions from for Migration Manager will still be on your homepage. The Lunch and Learns from 2011 will still be exactly where they were before. You're migrating a whole bunch of old versions of documents that you probably don't need unless you have compliance reasons. You haven't improved on search. You've left everything exactly the same. You haven't taken into account the SharePoint inventory either. So you've looked, there's content inventory, right? So you're upgrading old content that's irrelevant. And you're not taking into account SharePoint inventory either. So you may be upgrading lists with list view threshold issues instead of splitting them into multiple other lists, or changing them into what's called search-based list views. If you use a migration tool like Content Matrix, you can overcome all these potential content issues. You can remove excess versions of documents to increase speed. You can say, okay, just migrate the last 3 versions. You can remove unused templates. You can migrate immediately, map your team site to a community site so that you get social up front during the migration. You can map from site and list-based choice columns to manage metadatabase columns during the migration, improving your information architecture right on the way. You can filter out content that's old and filter in only content that's useful. You can reorganize. You can promote that product management sub-site underneath engineering to a separate site collection called PMM during the upgrade, instead of having to do all of that with a lot of PowerShell and a lot of manual labor after the upgrade. So that's really where out-of-the-box tools versus third-party migration, where third-party migration becomes a lot more powerful. You can skip versions, you can do site collection specific versus content DB upgrades, you can reorganize, split sites, split lists, improve taxonomy, improve search, re-template sites, and also upgrade your workflows and so on. And that's it. That's really what it's all about. So I know that was a lot to cover in a short period of time. I hope that you got some good value out of it. Obviously, we're available for follow-up. So this Steve Marsh's email, feel free to email him. You can also email me. My email is torbach, T-O-R-B-A-C-H, @metalogix.com. And of course, Claire at Protiviti, and her email is there. And if if anyone's hanging around that wants to ask questions, I'm certainly open to any of those. But in the interest of time, I want to make sure that those of you who do need to leave can, and I'll open up to questions there. So, Claire, do we have any questions on a Q&A session separately, or are we going to open up to the audience? How do you guys typically do that? I change you to the presenter, Claire.
There we go. I'm sorry, everyone. Can
There
you hear
you
me
are.
now? Well, thanks, Tamir. I'm looking at the question box. I don't see any questions coming in, but I think that was great information. And I'd say our takeaway today is that it's valuable to plan and take time before you upgrade if you want to have a successful migration. So thanks very much. If anyone has any questions, you can get in touch with us. Thanks for joining us, and we will see everybody next time.
Great. Thanks, Claire. Thanks for having us on.
Thank you.